I blinked twice, wondering if I was still dreaming. Nope. There were actually people setting up a wedding arch and chairs on my property while I was still in my bathrobe. My $575,000 0-cent dream home that I'd saved for 7 years to buy was apparently today's wedding venue, and nobody bothered to tell me. The HOA president, Karen Wilshire, was directing workers like a 5-star general, pointing where to place flower arrangements on my lawn. The confusion on my face quickly hardened into pure rage as I realized what was happening. What would you do if you came home to find your HOA had rented out your house for a stranger's wedding without even asking? Drop a comment below. I need to know if my reaction was justified. Let me back up a bit. I'm Alex Martinez, 38, environmental engineer, first-generation college grad, and, as of 6 months ago, proud homeowner in the prestigious Sycamore Estates community. After living in a cramped apartment for years, I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on my dream home, a charming 1,940s cottage with mature oak trees and a garden that sold me the minute I saw it. The neighborhood was picture-perfect, immaculate lawns, tasteful landscaping, and what the realtor called pride of ownership on every street. Yes, the HOA fees were steep, $750, 0 cents monthly. But the amenities seemed worth it: community pool, tennis courts, and a clubhouse for events. I spent every weekend renovating, personalizing each room with careful attention to detail. The smell of fresh paint and sawdust became my weekend perfume, the satisfying ache in my muscles at day's end a reminder that this place was finally mine. I noticed the subtle shift in some neighbors' expressions when they realized I wasn't just the contractor but the new owner. I was the only non-white homeowner on my block, something I hadn't thought much about until the welcome started feeling less than welcoming. Enter Karen Wilshire, HOA president for 12 consecutive years running unopposed. Mid-50s, bleached blonde bob that never moved in the wind, and a luxury SUV with the vanity plate, Hope Res. You could hear her coming before you saw her. The distinctive click, click, click of her heels on pavement made neighbors instinctively check their lawns for violations. She'd previously worked in property management before retiring to full-time HOA presidency, which apparently paid nothing officially, but afforded her a lifestyle that seemed beyond what retirement should provide. Our first encounter came just 3 weeks after moving in. I found a violation notice taped to my door. $200, 0 cents fine, for an unapproved lawn ornament. Specifically, a garden gnome my niece had given me as a housewarming gift. The violation notice came printed on expensive linen paper that felt almost apologetic beneath my furious fingertips. But there are identical gnomes in at least 3 yards on this street, I pointed out at my first HOA meeting. Karen's smile never reached her eyes. Perhaps you didn't thoroughly read the 87-page community guidelines, Mr. Martinez. Section 12, paragraph 4 clearly states that all lawn ornaments must receive written approval before installation. I reluctantly paid the fine and removed the gnome, trying to play nice to fit in. I should have known that garden gnome was just the beginning. Karen wasn't just testing boundaries, she was seeing how much I'd tolerate before pushing back. 2 months later, another notice appeared in my mailbox. This one detailed holiday decoration limitations for the upcoming season. The letter specified that traditional holiday colors were required for Christmas displays, with a highlighted note about maintaining neighborhood aesthetic values. Reading between the lines, it was clearly discouraging my planned 3 Kings Day decorations. The strange thing? None of my neighbors received this reminder. When I casually asked about decoration rules at the community mailboxes, my neighbor Bill looked confused. "We've always done our own thing for the holidays. The Goldsteins have that giant inflatable menorah, and nobody's ever said a word." Something didn't add up. That evening I did some digging and discovered that the previous Latino family in my house had faced similar selective enforcement before selling. An online neighborhood forum archive revealed several complaints about Wilshire's tactics over the years. Then came a private message from someone named Sophia. "We lived in your house for 2 years before selling. Karen made our lives hell with violations nobody else got. She has a vendetta against certain types moving into Sycamore. Document everything." That advice lit a fire under me. I spent the weekend researching HOA laws and discovered something interesting. HOAs are legally required to enforce covenants uniformly across all properties. The selective enforcement Karen was practicing could potentially invalidate her authority to issue those violations. I submitted a formal records request for all HOA violation notices from the past 24 months, something they're legally required to provide. While waiting for the response, I walked the neighborhood with my phone, photographing identical, or worse, violations on other properties that had received no notices. Here's what most homeowners don't know. In most states, HOAs must enforce covenants uniformly across all properties or risk losing their authority to enforce selectively cited violations. That single fact became my first piece of ammunition. My research caught attention. Several neighbors expressed support privately, but admitted they feared retaliation. "She keeps a list," whispered Mr. Jenkins from across the street. "Cross her once, and suddenly your approval requests go missing." The retired attorney 2 doors down, a gentleman named Richard Thompson, stopped me while I was checking my mail. Without making eye contact, he slipped me the business card of an HOA specialist lawyer. "Just in case," he mumbled before shuffling away. That same week, I spotted Karen photographing my house at odd hours. When confronted, she claimed she was documenting the historical architecture of the neighborhood for the community newsletter. Funny how my house was the only one needing this historical documentation. The final straw came when I checked my bank account and noticed my HOA payments were being held in special review status, despite being paid on time every month. The accounting office claimed this was standard procedure for new residents, yet none of my neighbors had experienced this standard procedure. The smell of discrimination hung in the air like the acrid scent of burning leaves, unmistakable and impossible to ignore. Spring arrived with flowers blooming and Karen unveiling her newest power grab at the quarterly HOA meeting, the Property Value Protection Initiative. Beneath the innocuous name lurked new restrictions requiring pre-approval for all outdoor gatherings with more than 10 people. "We've had complaints," Karen announced to the crowded clubhouse, eyes briefly flicking my way, "about loud music and cooking odors, disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of neighboring properties." The new rules included a vague clause about community-appropriate activities, with the board having final say on what qualified. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had already planned my family reunion for the following month. 30-plus relatives, flights booked from 3 states, food orders placed for a traditional celebration. My grandmother's infamous spicy cooking would definitely violate whatever cooking odors regulation Karen had invented. That woman's enchiladas could peel paint at 20 paces, in the most delicious way possible. I dutifully submitted my event application as required. The denial came within 48 hours, citing vague capacity concerns and inadequate parking provisions. Yet the following weekend, board member Diane Taylor hosted her son's high school graduation party with at least 40 cars lining the street. No approval required, apparently. That inconsistency gave me an idea. I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the county for all permits issued to our HOA for events. While waiting, I dug deeper into HOA financial regulations and discovered something useful. HOAs that collect over $500,000 0 cents annually must undergo third-party financial audits that any member can request. Something Karen had been avoiding for years. With our hefty dues and 200 homes, Sycamore Estates easily cleared that threshold. The FOIA request yielded gold. Our HOA had been renting out the clubhouse for weddings and events without properly reporting the income. According to county records, the rentals were being processed through Wilshire Property Management, Karen's private company, not the HOA's official accounts. Karen's response was swift. An emergency board meeting was called without proper notice to members, a violation of state law requiring 72 hours advance notice, except in genuine emergencies. They hastily passed a resolution giving the board discretionary authority on events and facility usage. Meanwhile, Karen began a whisper campaign against me. Neighbors reported her suggesting my home might be better suited in another neighborhood, and that I was trying to change our community values. One brave soul recorded her saying, "Some people just don't understand what makes Sycamore Estates special, and maybe they should look elsewhere." The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. Every morning, walk with my coffee mug felt like running a gauntlet of whispers and false smiles. But I wasn't going anywhere. This was my home. And I was just getting started. I returned from a 3-day business trip to find a landscaping crew removing the heritage rose bushes along my front walkway. These weren't just any plants. They were 50-year-old specimens that the previous owner had carefully tended for decades. "What are you doing?" I demanded, rushing from my car. The foreman handed me a work order signed by Karen citing unapproved plant species requiring immediate removal. The diesel fumes from their equipment hung in the air, overwhelming the delicate scent of the roses they'd already uprooted and tossed into a truck. That smell lingered in my garden soil for days afterward, a constant reminder of the violation. The damage totaled over $1,200, 0 cents. Roses that age are practically irreplaceable. A quick review of the covenants confirmed what I suspected. There were no restrictions on rosebush varieties. The previous homeowner later confirmed by email that those exact plants had been approved years ago and were regularly featured in the community garden tour. The situation grew even more suspicious when I discovered that Karen's sister owned Precision Landscaping, the very company doing the removal. The invoice they left showed charges to the HOA for covenant enforcement, not to me directly. I filed an insurance claim naming the HOA as the responsible party and sent a certified letter demanding reimbursement for damages. My research uncovered another useful fact. Most HOA directors and officers' insurance doesn't cover willful misconduct, making board members personally liable for damages caused by unauthorized actions. This meant Karen herself might be on the hook for the replacement costs if the insurance company denied the claim due to her overreach. From that day forward, I started recording all interactions with board members. Thankfully, we lived in a one-party consent state for recordings. Every conversation, every meeting, every coincidental run-in at the mailboxes, all documented. My situation wasn't unique. After posting about the rosebush incident on the neighborhood's private social media page, several neighbors shared similar stories of selective enforcement. Lisa from Maple Court had her koi pond filled with concrete while on vacation. Michael on Oak Drive had his vintage basketball hoop removed despite its grandfather status in the covenants. The local gardening club president, an influential community member named Eleanor, who'd lived in Sycamore Estates for 30 years, was particularly outraged at the destruction of my heritage roses. "Those bushes were part of this neighborhood's history," she fumed over tea in my kitchen. "Karen's gone too far this time." The final piece fell into place when a board member's teenage son, who did IT work for the HOA website, confided that Karen had been using HOA contract opportunities to benefit friends and family businesses without competitive bidding. A clear violation of the bylaws, requiring 3 quotes for any service over $1,000, 0 cents. I started an anonymous neighborhood social media group, Sycamore Estates Transparency Project. Membership grew quickly as residents found a safe space to share their experiences with Karen's reign. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole would go. Planning to install a security fence after the rosebush incident, I ordered a full title search to confirm my property lines. What came back changed everything. Buried in the county records was an unusual easement document I almost missed. Digging deeper, I discovered my specific lot had a unique history. It had formerly been community common area that was converted to a private lot 15 years ago. The title company confirmed this conversion happened during Karen's first year as president. The fascinating part? Critical signatures were missing from the conversion documentation, including the county planning commissioner's approval and the required 2/3 membership vote certification. This wasn't just an administrative oversight. It meant my property legally existed in a dual-status gray area. The HOA had far less authority over my property than they claimed, because the conversion hadn't been properly finalized. I spent 3 hours that night deep diving into property law, which was somehow more entertaining than the last 3 Marvel movies combined. Each discovery felt like fitting another piece into a conspiracy puzzle, where I was both detective and victim. This revelation warranted professional help. I hired a private investigator with experience in HOA disputes to examine the association's financial records. His findings exceeded my wildest suspicions. The HOA had been renting out community properties for private events for years, with the wedding revenue going into a separate community improvement account that only Karen had signing authority over. The investigator uncovered the smoking gun on day 3. The HOA website had a password-protected section advertising exclusive properties for rental, including my charming historic cottage with mature gardens as a wedding venue option. My house, my private property, was being marketed to strangers without my knowledge or consent. The rental description specifically highlighted my photogenic cottage gardens, ideal for ceremonies up to 75 guests, with a rate card of $3,500.00 per event. According to the booking calendar, they'd rented my property 6 times in the past year alone, over $20,000.00 in revenue I never saw a penny of. I immediately scheduled a consultation with a real estate attorney who reviewed my findings and confirmed, "This isn't just HOA overreach, it's fraud. They're literally selling access to property they don't own." I filed a police report for trespassing and conversion of property that same afternoon. The officer taking my statement raised his eyebrows several times as I laid out the evidence. "I've seen HOA disputes before, but nothing quite like this," he admitted. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I received a misdelivered envelope meant for Karen. Inside was the wedding invitation for the ceremony being set up at my house. The bride's last name? Wilshire. Karen's niece was getting married in my garden, making this not just fraud but personally beneficial fraud. The game had changed completely. This wasn't just about fighting discriminatory enforcement anymore. Karen was literally stealing my property for her family's use. With evidence mounting, I assembled my response team. First, the legal strategy. I consulted with 3 specialists, an HOA attorney, a real estate lawyer, and a fraud investigator. Together, we prepared a cease and desist order, a formal complaint to the State Real Estate Commission, and a civil suit outline. "Document everything," emphasized the HOA attorney as we spread papers across my dining room table. "HOAs operate in shadows. Bringing everything into the light is half the battle." The legal research yielded a powerful tool. In most states, HOA board members who personally profit from their position face triple damages under fiduciary breach statutes. This meant Karen could be personally liable for 3 times the rental income she'd collected from my property, potentially over $60,000.00. My financial advisor helped craft a counter-strategy to protect my investment. We opened an escrow account to legally withhold HOA dues during the dispute. This was crucial knowledge. When HOAs engage in documented financial impropriety, members can often legally escrow dues payments pending resolution, effectively cutting off the board's cash flow without risking foreclosure or late fees. As an additional precaution, I secured property lien protection insurance in case Karen attempted to place a lien for the escrowed dues. The smell of freshly printed legal documents filled my office, a peculiar mix of toner and possibility that somehow felt encouraging. The financial advisor made a surprising discovery while reviewing HOA payment records. 7 other homeowners were already quietly escrowing their payments through various methods. The rebellion had begun before I even arrived. Next came property protection measures. I installed comprehensive security cameras covering all property lines and approaches. With my attorney's help, we expedited a perimeter fence installation, despite HOA objections, citing security concerns that legally trumped aesthetic restrictions. No trespassing and property under surveillance signs went up at every entrance point. When Karen sent a violation notice for unapproved signage, my attorney responded with a single sentence, citing the state statute that exempts legally required notices from HOA restrictions. A certified surveyor came out to place official markers and property line flags, a visual reminder to everyone exactly where my land began and ended. The surveyor, a retired man with leathery skin and calloused hands, winked as he pounded in the last stake. 25 years doing this job, and HOA disputes are always my favorite. Good luck, son. The most delicate phase was building community alliances. I invited a small group of trusted neighbors for strategy sessions, keeping the circle tight to prevent leaks. The kitchen table became command central, with early morning meetings fueled by the sharp smell of fresh coffee and shared frustration. We developed an HOA meeting attendance strategy, ensuring enough sympathetic homeowners would be present for any important votes. Eleanor from the garden club connected me with a local reporter who'd covered housing issues for years and had a particular interest in HOA overreach stories. "The media loves David versus Goliath stories," Eleanor explained, stirring honey into her tea, "especially when Goliath is renting out David's slingshot behind his back." By the end of the week, my dining room wall displayed a comprehensive strategy map with timelines, contingency plans, and action items. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, just 4 days away, and according to the rental agreement I'd obtained, setup would begin Friday morning. I was as ready as I'd ever be for the showdown. Karen must have sensed the walls closing in. She called an emergency board meeting, declaring a community integrity crisis requiring immediate action. The outcome? A new special assessment, $5,000, 0 cents per home, for a legal defense fund to protect our community standards. The notice arrived in a community-wide email that carefully avoided specific details about what legal issues required such an enormous fund. The assessment would be due within 30 days, with penalties for late payment. Meanwhile, the intimidation campaign intensified. Board members were photographing my house daily, documenting supposed violations. My next-door neighbor texted me a photo of Karen and 2 board members standing in front of my property, pointing at various features and taking notes. Coming home from work, I found an anonymous note tucked under my windshield wiper. "People like you don't belong here. Sell while you can." The paper was the same expensive linen stock as official HOA notices, a detail that wouldn't go unnoticed in my documentation. I'd become the neighborhood's unofficial legal consultant overnight, my phone blowing up with texts starting with "hypothetically speaking," as neighbors sought advice about their own HOA issues. One message particularly caught my attention. Check what permits require HOA approval versus county-only approval. This sent me down a productive research path. A visit to the county permit office revealed something valuable. Demolition permits don't require HOA approval for structures under certain sizes. The garden shed in my backyard, the one conveniently located in the middle of where wedding chairs were to be placed, technically qualified as a demowable structure without approval. Even better, demolition permits for structures under 400 square feet typically cost under $200, 0 cents, and can be self-executed in most counties without contractor licensing. The permit clerk processed my application with raised eyebrows but no questions. While at the county offices, I noticed a familiar name on the resignation letter board. The HOA treasurer had quietly stepped down, citing personal reasons. 2 days later, I received separate text messages from 2 board members wanting to meet, somewhere private. Over coffee at a cafe 10 miles from Sycamore Estates, they expressed growing concerns about Karen's leadership. "The financial records don't add up," whispered one, "and she's obsessed with forcing you out. It's all she talks about in executive sessions." The whistleblower floodgates had opened. An anonymous letter appeared in all residents' mailboxes, detailing financial irregularities and the unauthorized rental program. Karen's response was swift and desperate. I returned home from grocery shopping to find my water turned off. The water department confirmed they'd received a request for infrastructure maintenance specific to my address, a request that came from the HOA office. The next day, a city inspector knocked on my door following a complaint about an unauthorized business operation at my home. When I showed him my home office setup, completely within regulations for remote work, he apologized for the wasted visit. The most brazen move came when Karen was captured on my security camera removing mail from my mailbox, a federal crime that could carry serious consequences. The footage clearly showed her pocketing an envelope before hurrying away. The final indignity: returning from the grocery store to find my car had been towed from my own driveway. The towing company apologetically returned my vehicle without charge when I showed my ID and property deed, explaining they'd been told it was an abandoned vehicle on HOA property. Karen was getting sloppy in her desperation, and every mistake added to my growing case against her. The wedding revelation came through a stroke of pure luck. A neighbor accidentally received mail intended for Karen and brought it to me instead of returning it to her. "I thought you should see this," she said nervously, handing me an expensive envelope. Inside was the official wedding invitation for Karen's niece Jessica Wilshire to Andrew Peterson. The venue was listed as Wilshire Family Garden, with my exact address printed in elegant calligraphy. The embossed invitation felt heavy in my hands, the thick paper ironically using an image of my own garden roses, the ones Karen had tried to remove, without permission. Wedding details confirmed everything. Ceremony planned for 4 p.m. Saturday, reception to follow with 75 guests expected. My property had been rebranded as a family estate for Karen's personal benefit. With the demolition permit secured, I contacted a company specializing in rapid response projects. Their quote included a premium for weekend work, but the timing was essential. The garden shed demolition was scheduled for precisely 3:45 p.m. on Saturday, 15 minutes before the ceremony's start time. My attorney confirmed, property owners have absolute right to conduct permitted demolition on their own land, regardless of HOA aesthetic restrictions, provided safety protocols are followed. This protection exists specifically to prevent homeowners associations from blocking necessary property maintenance or improvements. I also checked with the police department about legal protest rights on my own property. The officer I spoke with, the same one who took my initial report, seemed to be fighting a smile as he reviewed my plans. Just make sure all activity remains on your property, he advised, and consider having your attorney present. The final preparations came together quickly. I obtained a special insurance rider for demolition day to cover any potential claims. A local news tip was anonymously submitted about HOA fraudulently renting private property for profit, with documentation attached. The day before the wedding, I arranged for a county inspector to verify and mark my property boundaries. He placed official flags along the perimeter, making the lines unmistakably clear to anyone approaching. The most surprising discovery came through the neighborhood grapevine. 3 other properties in Sycamore Estates had similarly been rented without owner knowledge, all homes whose owners traveled frequently for work. One belonged to a military family currently deployed overseas. Friday afternoon, the wedding rental company arrived with the first delivery of equipment. The driver looked confused when I met him in the driveway. "This is 1542 Sycamore Lane, right?" he confirmed, checking his paperwork. "It is. It's also my private property and I haven't authorized any rentals or events." I presented my property documentation and denied access. The crunch of gravel under the rental truck's tires as they reluctantly backed out of my driveway was immensely satisfying. Karen arrived 20 minutes later, face flushed with anger. "You're making a terrible mistake," she hissed. "There will be severe consequences for this obstruction." "I believe the consequences you're referring to are actually called legal remedies, and they'll be coming your way shortly," I replied, my security cameras recording every word of the exchange. As she drove away, I received a text from my attorney, "Everything's set for tomorrow. Don't engage further until I arrive." The battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow would bring either resolution or escalation. Either way, things at Sycamore Estates would never be the same. Saturday dawned bright and clear, perfect weather for a wedding, or in my case, perfect weather for serving justice. By 9 a.m., I had legally posted my property with final warnings and demolition notices at every possible entrance point. The demolition company arrived shortly after to set up safety barriers around the garden shed. At 10:30, Karen's car screeched into my driveway, wedding planner and florist in tow. Her face went from determined to stunned as she saw the demolition notices and equipment. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, marching toward me. "Exercising my rights as a property owner," I replied calmly. "I have a permitted demolition scheduled for today." "Cancel it immediately. We have a wedding happening here in a few hours." "A wedding I never approved on property you've been fraudulently renting out," I countered. "Perhaps you should start making alternative arrangements." The wedding planner looked horrified, phone already in hand. "Karen, you told me this venue was family property." Karen's desperate smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's a community misunderstanding. Alex here is just being difficult about neighborhood traditions." That's when I played my trump card. "Officer Phillips," I called to the police officer who had just pulled up. "I believe we have trespassers attempting to access private property against posted notices." Karen immediately called the police herself, creating the surreal situation of having 2 officers responding to calls from both sides. While they sorted out the property rights question, the first wedding guests began arriving, witnessing the unfolding drama from the street. The county clerk I'd arranged to be present confirmed my property rights to the officers. "The deed is clear, and there's no legal easement allowing HOA usage of this specific property," he explained, reviewing documents on his tablet. The buzz of confused conversations grew louder as more guests arrived, mixing with the distant sound of demolition equipment being warmed up for the scheduled start time. Bridesmaids in matching robes arrived for pre-ceremony preparations, only to find themselves stranded on the sidewalk. Karen made one final, desperate attempt. Pulling me aside, she whispered urgently, "Name your price to allow us just today. My niece will be devastated. Whatever you want, I can make it happen." "What I want is for you to face consequences for years of discrimination and fraud," I replied. "This stops today." At precisely 3:45 p.m., Precisely as permitted, the demolition crew started their equipment. The garden shed demolition began with the satisfying crack of wood being separated from its foundation. A news van pulled up. The tip had worked. A reporter approached with a cameraman in tow, asking questions about the unusual scene. Wedding guests in formal attire watching a demolition crew work, while police kept everyone on the sidewalk. The situation reached critical mass when other homeowners began arriving, victims of Karen's selective enforcement, who'd heard about the confrontation through the neighborhood alert system we'd established. Each carried their own cease and desist orders for Karen. As the crowd grew and the demolition proceeded, I stepped forward to address the gathered wedding party, who deserved an explanation. The noise from the demolition equipment temporarily paused as I spoke. "I apologize that you've been caught in this unfortunate situation. Your wedding venue was booked on private property without the owner's consent. My property. For years, the HOA president has been running an illegal rental operation, discriminating against homeowners and pocketing the profits." I held up a folder of documents. "I've filed formal charges with the police department and state attorney general's office with evidence of years of discriminatory practices and financial fraud. I truly regret that your special day has been affected by these illegal activities." Karen tried to interrupt, but her niece stepped forward first. "Aunt Karen, is this true? You told us this was your investment property." The crowd fell silent as Karen stammered through an unconvincing denial. I delivered the final blow. "And by the way, Karen, I've purchased the foreclosed property next door for significantly under market value, thanks to your artificially inflated HOA fees driving the previous owners out. I'm converting it to affordable housing for environmental science students. The first residents move in next month." The stunned silence that followed was broken only by the click of camera shutters, as the news crew captured Karen's face crumpling in defeat. The aftermath was swift and comprehensive. An emergency HOA meeting was called by the remaining board members for the following Tuesday. With record attendance, the community voted overwhelmingly to remove Karen from her position, pending investigation. An interim board was appointed, including myself and several others, who represented the neighborhood's actual diversity. Who would have guessed I'd find myself with an unexpected second career in HOA reform? Certainly not me. The guy who just wanted to put a garden gnome on his lawn 6 months earlier. Karen's legal troubles mounted quickly. The evidence I'd gathered led to charges of mail tampering, a federal offense, fraud, and criminal trespass. Facing potential jail time, she accepted a plea deal requiring full restitution to affected homeowners and 500 hours of community service, ironically assigned to a housing equality nonprofit. The HOA insurance company filed a separate suit against her for fiduciary violations, seeking to recover their costs. This unveiled another important lesson for homeowners. HOA directors who violate their duty of care may face personal liability that extends beyond their term of service. Some states allow claims for up to 7 years after incidents. Karen's legal and financial nightmare was just beginning, while our community's healing had already started. Sycamore Estates underwent a remarkable transformation over the next 6 months. We completely rewrote the HOA bylaws with homeowner-friendly provisions developed through inclusive community workshops. Fees were reduced by 40% after a forensic audit revealed years of unnecessary administrative costs and inflated vendor contracts. Quarterly financial reviews became standard practice, conducted by an independent third party with results published to all homeowners. We created a new community mediation process for resolving disputes before they escalated to formal violations. My own garden was restored with help from neighborhood volunteers, including several master gardeners who donated rare heritage roses to replace those destroyed. The community spirit that emerged from shared adversity proved stronger than the divisions Karen had cultivated for years. My property became part of the legitimate community garden tour the following spring, with proceeds benefiting local housing initiatives. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was my relationship with Jessica, Karen's niece. After the wedding disaster, she reached out to apologize and proved to be nothing like her aunt. We actually became friends, and she later joined our community improvement committee. "Family resemblance doesn't extend to ethics," she joked during our first volunteer project together. The sound of neighborhood children playing in the shared green space that was previously restricted to quiet activities only became the soundtrack of our community's rebirth. Dogs were finally allowed in the park, and the quarterly potluck became a celebration of our diverse culinary traditions rather than the sterile, appropriate foods-only event it had been under Karen's reign. The lessons from our HOA battle extended beyond Sycamore Estates. We established the Sycamore Estates Housing Justice Scholarship for law students specializing in housing equality, funded through the recovered rental fees and donations. Our annual Neighborhood Cultural Festival became a highlight of the county's event calendar, celebrating the diverse traditions that make up our community. The local community college now uses our HOA case study and real estate courses as an example of both what can go wrong and how communities can rebuild. Looking back from my porch swing, watching neighbors chat as they walk dogs and children ride bikes freely on our streets, I realize that sometimes you have to be willing to demolish the old structures, literally and figuratively, to build something that truly feels like home. Have you ever dealt with an HOA nightmare that makes mine look tame? Share your story in the comments, I read every one, and subscribe for more stories about standing up to corrupt systems and coming out on top, because sometimes the best revenge is living well and changing the game for everyone who comes after you.